The wind was dry and sharp across the old plains. It moved like a whisper between the hills, kicking dust and secrets into the air. Thomas Carver sat high on his mule cart, his eyes steady on the path ahead. He didn't smile much these days. Didn't talk either, not since the sickness took his wife, and the silence became his home. It had been for years now. 4 years of planting corn, fixing fences, and living with ghosts. No one came out this far anymore, not even male riders. The world forgot about Thomas, and he didn't mind that one bit. But that evening, the world sent him a reminder. The sun dipped low, bleeding orange and gold across the sky. He turned down the path toward his cabin. The cart creaked, and the mule grunted. But Thomas pulled gently on the reins. Something wasn't right. Even the wind felt strange. His dog, Buck, didn't bark when he got close to home. That was the first sign. Buck always barked. Always met him halfway, but not today. Today the dog stayed near the porch. Ears back, tail low, eyes locked on the tree line. Thomas followed the stare. There she stood, a girl. Or maybe a woman, taller than any woman he had ever seen. Her shoulders wide like a warrior. Her skin a deep copper, glowing in the last light of the sun. Her long black hair hung heavy down her back, tangled and dusty. Her dress, or what was left of it, was torn and stained. Pieces of cloth wrapped around her arms and waist. But barely enough to call clothing. She didn't move. She just stood there. Watching him, Thomas didn't reach for his gun. Not yet. He had seen fear before. Seen it in soldiers, in orphans, and in the eyes of starving people. She wasn't angry. She wasn't wild. She was just tired, empty, broken. He took one step forward. She raised both hands slowly, voice dry and soft. "Don't shoot," she said. "I got no weapons." Her voice cracked on the last word, like it hurt to speak. Thomas nodded once. "You hungry?" She gave the smallest nod. "I got stew inside." He said, "Can you walk?" She tried, but her knees gave out, and she dropped to the ground with a soft thud. Thomas didn't think, just moved. He rushed over and lifted her in his arms. She was heavy, strong-built, like she'd once been powerful. But now, she was just bones and fever. She didn't resist. Just rested her head against his chest and whispered, "Name's Maya." Thomas carried her into the cabin. The dog followed close, unsure, but quiet. Inside the cabin was simple one bed, one table, one old fireplace. He laid her gently on the bed and threw a blanket over her. Then went to the stove and added wood, lit a fire, and put on a pot of stew. The smell filled the room, slowly beans, dried meat, some herbs he found near the creek. Warm and earthy, Maya watched him with half-closed eyes. "You live alone?" she asked. Thomas nodded. A long time now. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "I was with my tribe," she said slowly. "We were moving through the canyons. Soldiers came, fast and loud. No time to run. I hid in a cave. When I came out, everyone was gone." She looked down at her hands, dirty and scraped. "I walked for days." Thomas didn't speak. He just handed her a cup of stew and sat down nearby. She took one small sip and then another. Tears filled her eyes, but didn't fall. "This cabin smells like a man," she whispered. "A real man." Thomas raised his brow, unsure what she meant. She looked straight at him, her voice shaking. "I'm starving for a man's touch." He didn't answer, couldn't. He hadn't heard words like that in years, hadn't felt anything in years. The wind howled outside again, but this time it wasn't cold. It was bringing something new. Her name was Maya, and she wasn't just hungry for food. She was hungry for something deeper, and Thomas, the quiet, lonely farmer, suddenly felt something stir inside him. Something warm, something dangerous, something alive. Maya slept for hours. In the warmth of the cabin, while the fire cracked and the wind whispered through the wooden walls outside. It was the deepest sleep she had tasted in days, maybe weeks, and Thomas watched her quietly from the wooden chair near the fire, his old boots resting beside the dog that still didn't take his eyes off her. Thomas didn't understand what had pulled her to his land, or why she spoke to him like that last night, but her words kept echoing inside him, not just in his head, but in his chest, like they were burning into something he thought had died with his wife's mourning, broke with a golden sky and the smell of smoke and stew hanging in the air. Thomas poured some water into a tin bowl and placed it near her bed, along with a clean cloth. He didn't say anything when she opened her eyes, but she looked at him with a strange mix of pain and trust. "You could have left me out there," she said slowly. "I wouldn't have blamed you." Thomas didn't answer. He just picked up the kettle and poured some hot water into a cup and handed it to her. She took it carefully, her hands still shaking a little. "No one's touched me in weeks," she said, more to herself than to him, not even to help, not even to push away, just nothing. Like I wasn't even there. Thomas stirred the ashes in the fireplace and said, "You're here now. You made it through. That means something." Maya smiled faintly, but it vanished quick. "You don't know what I've done to survive. I ain't proud of it, but I did what I had to," she said. Thomas looked at her closely. "I don't need to know everything, not yet." She blinked a few times like she was holding something back, but then she sat up slowly, her back straight against the wall, and her long hair falling down like a curtain over her shoulders. "I was married once," she said softly. "He was a warrior, strong, brave, everyone said so, but he never looked at me like a woman, just like a weapon to keep by his side." She paused, and her voice dropped. "Then the raids started. We lost everyone one by one, even him in the end." Thomas listened in silence. Every word she said felt like a stone dropped into still water, shaking the quiet between them. "I wandered after that," Maya continued. "Sometimes I worked for food, sometimes I fought for it, and sometimes I begged. I even sold my bracelets for one dry biscuit once. Imagine that, a warrior's wife trading gold for crumbs." Thomas stood and walked to the shelf, pulling out some dry cornbread. He placed it on a plate and set it gently in her lap. No questions, just kindness. She looked down at the food, then up at him again, her eyes soft but full of thunder like a storm trapped behind stone walls. "You don't flinch," she said. "Most men do when they see me. This big body, this strength, they either want to use it or run from it. But you just see me like I'm a woman, like I'm still worth something." Thomas sat across from her and said, "You're more than worth something, Maya. You're alive and you're still here. That counts for more than anything." Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the bread. She took a bite, small and slow, and chewed like every crumb held a memory. Then she spoke again, her voice now almost a whisper. "I ain't just starving for food, Thomas. I'm starving to be held like I matter, like I ain't just a shadow passing through someone's land." He felt those words like a blade and a blessing both at once. He stood and walked to the window, the light spilling in across his tired face. "You can stay here," he said finally, "as long as you want. No one will hurt you here. No one will treat you like nothing. Not while I'm breathing." She stared at his back, her lips parting like she wanted to say something but couldn't yet. The words were too heavy, too fragile. Then, without warning, the wind picked up again, slamming the shutters and sending a howl through the room. The fire danced in the hearth, and shadows crawled across the cabin walls. Maya didn't flinch this time. She looked at the flames, then at the man who had taken her in, fed her, and listened without judgment. She whispered to herself, but loud enough for Thomas to hear, "Maybe the wind brought me here for a reason, and for the first time in years." Thomas smiled, not just with his lips, but with something deep behind his ribs, something that almost felt like hope. The days passed slowly on Thomas Carver's land, with the wind rolling across the plains like a song no one remembered, and the sky changing from gold to blue to fire. Each evening, Maya stayed in the cabin, resting, healing, watching, and Thomas never asked her to leave. Not once. He built a routine around her without saying it out loud. She cleaned the dishes after meals, folded his extra shirts, stacked firewood in the corner, and every time she did something, he'd pause, like he wasn't used to the sound of another person moving in his space. Night, she would sit near the fire, cross-legged, her tall frame curled into a shape that somehow made her look smaller, her eyes always staring into the flames like she could see faces there, or maybe memories. Thomas watched her from his chair, sometimes pretending to read a book with no words on the page, just letting her voice fill the room when she decided to speak. "You keep this place too neat," she said one night. "Like you're afraid someone might come in and judge you?" Thomas smirked and replied, "Or maybe I just like it clean." She laughed, soft and deep, a sound that seemed to surprise, even hurt. Wasn't just the fire that warmed the cabin that night, but even as things grew comfortable, the air still held things unsaid, like the wind knew secrets and refused to let them sleep. One morning, Maya stood at the door, wrapped in a shawl, her hair brushed neat, her hands holding something small. It was a carved stone, painted with faded red lines. "My mother gave me this," she said before she passed. "It's supposed to protect women when they travel alone, but it didn't work for her or me." Thomas looked at the stone, then at Maya, and said, "You're still here? Maybe that's what it means. Maybe surviving is the protection." She didn't smile, but her eyes blinked fast, like the words touched something buried. That same afternoon, while gathering water from the creek, Maya noticed something in the grass, a half-buried wooden box hidden under old leaves and roots. She pulled it out and wiped the dirt away. It wasn't locked, just heavy with time. She brought it back to the cabin and placed it on the table in front of Thomas. "What's this?" she asked. He looked at the box and froze, his hands stiff, his jaw tight. "I haven't opened that in years," he said quietly. "Belonged to my wife." Maya stepped back without a word, her hands folding across her chest, her face unreadable to me. Opened the lid. Slow. Inside were photographs, letters, and a small silver comb, the kind used to fix a lady's hair for church on Sundays. "She was soft," Thomas whispered. "Not like you," she cried. "When birds fell from trees, she used to sing. While making bread, used to kiss my shoulder every morning without fail." He paused, looked at the comb, then closed the box. "She's gone now, and no ghost of her is in you, Maya. You're not her, and that's not a bad thing." Maya nodded once, but something flickered in her face. A tension, a storm behind calm waters. "I never wanted to replace her," she said. "I just wanted to know if I could matter to someone, to not be someone's second life or shadow." Thomas stood, walked to the window, his voice low. "You're not my second anything. You're the first stranger I let in since she died, and you broke through this silence like thunder. I didn't ask for you to come, but I'm not sending you away either." Maya walked to the door and opened it, the wind brushing through her hair. She didn't cry, didn't shake, just whispered, "Sometimes I think I'm cursed to walk alone forever until someone's strong enough says no more." Thomas didn't speak, but walked to her side and placed a hand gently on her back, not as a man claiming, not as a farmer helping, just as a soul answering a call. The wind shifted again, the clouds moving like curtains parting for something new, and inside that quiet cabin the past rested while something else began to rise, something deeper than hunger, something close to belonging. The corn grew tall that summer, with green stalks reaching for the sun and golden tips swaying like dancers in the wind. It was Thomas's best crop in years, and maybe that had nothing to do with rain or soil, and everything to do with the giant Apache girl who now walked his land barefoot and silent, like she belonged there. Maya rose early, before the rooster, sometimes before the sky even turned pink. She helped carry water, she fed the mule, and she walked the rows of corn with a careful eye. Thomas noticed she never touched the same row twice, and never spoke while among the stalks, like she was listening to something deeper than the wind. One morning, Thomas followed her not to spy, but to understand. He watched her from the edge of the fence as she knelt beside a plant, her large hand brushing away weeds with care, her eyes scanning for pests, her lips moving like a prayer. He stepped closer and said, "You talk to the corn now." She looked back with a half smile. "My people believe plants carry memory. They know who respects them and who does not. I don't talk to them, I just listen." Thomas chuckled, but nodded. "That corn's grown better since you started walking among it. Maybe there's something to your ways." Maya stood tall, towering over the green with sunlight, wrapping her like a golden robe. "Or maybe the land just needed a woman's touch again," she said softly. Later that day, Maya brought in a sack of herbs, wild onions, and cactus fruit she had found by the rocky hill. She cooked them into a stew that smelled like nothing Thomas had ever tasted before. Earthy, warm like summer after rain. They ate in silence again, but it was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of people who didn't need to talk to be understood. "I've dinner." Maya stood by the door, staring out across the fields, her voice low. "You ever wonder why I came to your land, not someone else?" "Us." Thomas looked up from his chair. "I figured the wind pushed you my way." She shook her head. "No, something darker followed me. Something that doesn't like when people find peace." He stood and walked toward her, his boots soft on the wooden floor. "What do you mean, darker, like soldiers?" She turned to him, her eyes sharp. "No worse than soldiers, something that hunts the soul, not the body," Thomas said. Nothing, but he reached for the old shotgun by the door and set it gently beside the frame. "I've fought raiders, wolves, and droughts," he said, "but I ain't ever seen anything that could scare a woman like you." She looked down, then met his eyes. "That's because you haven't seen it yet, but you will if it finds me again." Night came heavy and cold. Despite the fire, they both sat close, not touching, but not apart. Maya braided her hair slowly, her hands strong but graceful, and Thomas watched the flame dance on the wall like it knew things neither of them could speak aloud. When the clock ticked past midnight, the dog growled. Low, not barking, just a soft warning growl from deep in his chest. Thomas rose quickly, checked the window. Nothing but darkness and the sound of corn rustling like footsteps between the rows. Maya stood too, her eyes focused and calm. She didn't move toward the door. Instead, she whispered something in a language Thomas didn't understand, and then walked outside barefoot into the night. Thomas followed her heart, pounding, hands tight around the shotgun. They moved through the corn, the air thick with something unseen, something watching. Then he saw a figure, not a man, not an animal, just a shape between the stalks, standing tall and still as if carved from the night. Maya stepped in front of Thomas, her arms wide, her voice steady. "You cannot have me, not here, not anymore. This land does not belong to you." The shape didn't move, didn't speak, just vanished with the next gust of wind, as if the corn had swallowed it. Thomas looked around, chest heaving. "What was that, Maya? What in God's name was that?" She turned to him, her face pale but strong. "That was my past, trying to claim me again, but you stood with me, and now it cannot stay." They walked back to the cabin together, the wind behind them soft again, the dog waiting on the porch, tail wagging like nothing had happened. Inside, the fire still burned, and the silence returned, not empty, but filled with something new. Trust. The sky was painted in silver and blue that night, with the stars hanging low like lanterns. Watching the earth from above, the air was cool, the kind that slipped through cracks and made old wood creak. The cabin stood like a lone ship in a sea of corn, and silence wrapped around it like a blanket. Thomas couldn't sleep. The image of that dark figure in the corn still danced in his mind, not clear but sharp enough to haunt. He sat near the fireplace, sharpening his old hunting knife out of habit, not for need. His hands moved, but his thoughts were far away. Maya sat by the window, her knees pulled up to her chest, her eyes lost in the night, her long hair unbraided for once. falling over her shoulder like a dark river. She hadn't spoken much since they returned from the cornfield, but her presence filled the room louder than any sound. "I was trained to be strong," she said, "finally not to cry, not to feel, not to want, but sometimes in the dark, I still wish someone would just hold my hand like it meant something." Thomas looked up the knife, paused in his grip. He watched her for a moment, then said, "Why me, Maya? Why here? Why now?" She didn't turn around. Just whispered, "Because you see me not as a giant, not as a fighter, not as a broken woman, just as a person, and that is rare." He stood, walked toward her slow, like approaching a wild animal, not out of fear, but out of respect. He sat beside her, but left space between them, the kind of space filled with choice. "I don't know how to be gentle anymore," he said. "I worked this land with calloused hands. I buried my wife with these same fingers. I carry more silence than most men can hold." Maya looked at him then, her eyes soft, her voice quieter than before. "Then, let silence be enough." They sat like that for a long while, not touching, not talking, just breathing in the same space, sharing the same night. Then she reached out slowly, her hand hovering over his, as if asking without words. Thomas didn't move at first. Then he let his hand rise and meet hers. Her fingers were large, rough from work, but warm and steady. She didn't grip tightly, she didn't pull or press, she just held. It tanned something in that simple touch, broke through walls built over years of pain. He didn't cry, but his eyes stung, and he didn't speak, but his breath shook. "I'm not afraid of the dark anymore," she said, "but I am afraid of being forgotten." Again, Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "You're here, Maya, you ain't forgotten, not now, not ever." The wind blew soft outside the shutters, rattled like a heartbeat in wood, and far off in the corn, a lone crow called into the nights inside. The cabin, the fire dimmed, but the warmth between their palms stayed bright. She leaned her head against his shoulder, not in hunger, not in desperation, just in peace. "You smell like tobacco and old leather," she said, with a smile. It's oddly comforting. Thomas chuckled, a low sound that rumbled through his chest. "And you smell like sage and trouble." She laughed, then a real laugh full of life, and for a moment the cabin felt like a home, not just shelter, not just walls, but something that held hearts. Not just bodies. The night passed slowly, but neither of them wanted to sleep. They just sat there hand in hand, leaning into each other like roots finding ground again after a long dry season. Thomas thought about all the years he spent alone, all the mornings with no voice in the house, all the nights where only the wind answered Dan. Now here was this woman, this warrior, this stranger, who somehow understood everything. He never said. He turned his head slightly, whispered near her ear, "You belong here, Maya, not just in this cabin, but in this life if you want it." She didn't answer right away. She just closed her eyes and rested against him, breathing deep, like she was finally safe. And outside the corn whispered back and forth like it too agreed. The sky was still purple when the rooster crowed, but Thomas was already awake, sitting on the porch with his shotgun across his lap, the dog at his feet, and worry in his eyes. Maya was still asleep, wrapped in a blanket by the fireplace, her hand still resting where his had been hours before. The night had felt peaceful too. Peaceful like the silence before a storm. Thomas had lived long enough to know when something was coming, and it came. A single horse rode slow up the long, dusty trail, its hooves crunching dry grass, its rider tall, wrapped in a long brown coat, and wearing a hat pulled low over his face. But it wasn't the kind of traveler that made a man feel easy. Thomas stood slowly, the shotgun still loose in his hands, not raised, but ready. The rider stopped 10 feet from the porch, didn't speak, just looked up, revealing a sharp, sun-worn face and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You, Thomas Carver," the man said, voice like broken gravel. "Depends who's asking." Thomas replied, his voice steady. The man chuckled, then said, "Name's Cutter, and I'm looking for something that don't belong to you, something that ran off and left a trail cold." And quiet until now, Thomas didn't flinch. This land don't hide anything that don't want to be found. Cutter's eyes narrowed. I think you know what? I'm after a woman. Tall, strong Apache blood. She's got something of mine and I. Aimed to take it back before Thomas could answer. The door creaked open behind him, and Maya stepped out, barefoot hair loose, her eyes locked on the man below. You followed me, she said, not surprised, just tired. You were mine, Maya Cutter. Said you were marked, sold, and promised I waited a year before coming after you, but now I'm done waiting. Thomas took one step down from the porch between them. She ain't yours, not now, not ever, he said, his voice like iron. Cutter laughed. Again, but it sounded wrong, like a wolf laughing at a dying deer. And who are you to say that, old man? She's Apache. You're just some forgotten dirt farmer. You think she loves you? I don't need her to love me to protect her, Thomas replied, but I reckon she does more than you'll ever deserve. Cutter's hand twitched near his belt, but not fast enough. The dog growled low, and Maya moved like wind, stepping beside Thomas, her hand reaching for the knife tucked in her sash. You think you can take me back, she said, her voice calm. You think you can ride up here, threaten a man who gave me food, fire, and peace, and just walk away with me? Cutter smiled again, but this time with less confidence. I was paid for you, girl. I made promises. I ain't walking away empty-handed. Thomas raised the shotgun slightly. You ride back now, and you live, you try anything, and this field becomes your grave. The silence hung thick, like smoke, and Cutter's horse shifted uneasily finally. Cutter spat into the dirt, turned the horse slowly, and muttered, "This ain't over." Thomas watched him ride off, his shoulders still tense, his fingers wrapped tight on the barrel. Maya stood still until the rider vanished beyond the ridge, then let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. He was part of the trade routes. She said softly, they called themselves buyers, but they were just thieves, stealing women. Like cattle, branding us like stock. I escaped the night his brother tried to chain me to a wagon. Thomas said nothing, just walked back to the porch, sat down, and wiped sweat from his brow. Maya followed, sat beside him, and for a long time, neither spoke. The wind returned, soft and cool, brushing the tall corn-like fingers through hair, and the dog laid down, finally calm again. I don't want to run anymore, Maya whispered. I want to plant something and watch it grow. I want to sleep without listening for footsteps. I want to wake up next to someone who sees me as more than something to own. Thomas reached over, took her hand without a word, and this time she leaned her head on his shoulder without fear. Sun rose slow behind the hills, casting gold over the land, and for the first time in years, Thomas didn't feel alone, and Maya didn't feel hunted. The air smelled different that morning, thick with promise and the hush of something coming, something wild and sacred. Thomas stepped out into the yard, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The sky above, painted in heavy clouds that rolled like waves in the sky. Maya was already outside, standing tall in the open field, arms lifted toward the sky, her long hair flowing behind her like a black river caught in the wind. She wore a white cloth tied at the waist, a piece she had sewn herself from leftover fabric, and an old sack, her feet bare, her eyes closed. Thomas stood still, watching her movements slow and graceful, her arms cutting the air like wings, her feet spinning lightly through the dirt. She was dancing, not for him, not for show, but for something older than either of them, something the land understood without words. A low drumbeat came from her chest, her voice humming an old song with no name, a sound that rose and fell with the wind like rain whispering against dry earth. It began to drizzle, the kind of rain that soaked slow and deep, the kind that touched the roots, not just the leaves, and dumbed. Leaves and dumbed. Maya lifted her face to the sky, letting it wash over her like forgiveness. Felt something move inside him, something ancient and aching. He walked into the rain, letting it soak his shirt. His hat forgotten on the porch, he didn't dance, but he stood close enough for her To see him, Maya opened her eyes and smiled, not wide, but real, and walked to him, her hands reaching out, palms up, not asking, just offering. He placed his hands in hers, and she pulled him gently into the open field. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Their feet moved across the wet ground in a slow rhythm, a simple sway of bodies, not trained for dance, but willing to try. The rain grew stronger, falling around them in sheets, but they didn't run, didn't hide, they stayed in its arms, wrapped around each other, hearts beating loud against the storm. Thomas whispered against her hair, "I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I know I don't want to face it alone." Maya nodded against his chest. "Then don't we face it together, no matter what comes? No more running." They stood like that for what felt like hours, letting the rain baptize their sorrow and fears, letting it carry away years of silence and guilt and ghosts. Later that evening, soaked to the bone and smiling for the first time in too long, they sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, sipping warm tea that Maya had brewed from desert leaves and dry berries she found near the edge of the forest. "You danced like the rain was waiting just for you," Thomas said, watching the fire flicker across her skin. "It was," Maya answered. "In my tribe, we believe rain carries memory. When it comes after pain, it means the earth is listening, that healing has begun." Thomas looked at her, his eyes soft, his voice low. "And what about fire? What does it carry?" She leaned closer and said, "Fire carries truth. It burns away lies and fear, and what remains is what's real." He placed a hand gently on hers and said, "Then let's burn what's behind us and grow what's ahead." She squeezed his hand tight, not from fear, but from need, from trust, from something blooming that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with choice. Outside, the storm eased and the clouds began to break, letting in threads of silver moonlight that painted the land in soft light. The dog barked once, then curled by the fire, sighing in his sleep, and the mule brayed softly in the barn. Content, Maya rested her head on Thomas's shoulder, her eyes closing slowly. "This cabin used to feel like shelter. Now it feels like home." Thomas kissed her forehead gently, his breath warm against her skin. "You made it that way, Maya. Not the walls, not the roof. You." In the quiet glow of fire and rain and the fading thunder, they sat without worry, without shadows. And for the first time in both their lives, they knew what it meant to be wanted, not owned. Not saved, just seen and chosen. The days turned warm again, and the cornfields stood tall and proud under the golden sun. Maya worked beside Thomas each morning, her laughter rising like birdsong above the clatter of tools and the creak of wagon wheels. She was no longer a stranger, no longer a shadow passing through the land. She had become part of it. Thomas watched her from the porch, sometimes not with hunger or worry, but with something softer, something deeper, like a man watching his second chance walk in boots across his fields and smile without asking for anything in return. They built a small fence around the garden. Together she planted herbs, while he built posts and strung wire. She made clothes from old curtains and stitched blankets that smelled of wildflowers and wood smoke. She cooked meals that reminded him what it meant to be full in the heart, not just the belly. But not every day was gentle. One afternoon, while Thomas was away trading grain in town, Maya heard hooves again, too many for one horse, too loud to be passing through. She stepped out with her knife tucked into her belt and her back straight. Fray men rode up, all strangers, but their faces told her everything before they even opened their mouths. Dust-covered eyes, sharp with greed, they looked at her like she was something lost and found, something priced, not loved. "You're the one who ran the first man," said, spitting into the dirt. "We heard about you, Cutter. Said you were his property, said you'd fetch a fine reward." Maya didn't blink, didn't flinch. She stood taller than all three and spoke slow. "I belong to no man, and I never did. I am not cattle to be bought or sold, and if you take one more step, you'll find out what kind of fire lives in me." The second man laughed, pulled his rifle from the saddle, and pointed it her way. Ain't nobody out here to help you, missy. It's 3, 2, 1. And your fancy words won't stop bullets before he could aim a loud crack, split the air Thomas had returned.